Are you guys ready for another history lesson? This one is going to be borderline love story, borderline tragedy, and a bunch about positive fight for equity for all of us. This is about a woman who carried the torch of the labor movement after her husband was executed. And we're going to talk about how she did that from the age of 28 to 87. This is the story of Lucy and Albert Parsons. Albert and Lucy originally met and married in the state of Texas. Albert was refused employment because Lucy was of mixed ancestry, being African, Indigenous, and European American. So because she was a woman of color and very much so a Black woman and an indigenous woman, the racist of Texas did not want to employ her husband. But instead of giving into their racist horror, they just simply relocated to Chicago, and there he found employment, but he also was able to become a journalist and an active participant and even leader within the labor rights movement. It was due to his leadership within the labor movement that he was then executed. Albert and his crew were actively working for an 8-hour workday, and Lucy was right alongside Albert, fighting every step of the way. At one particular protest that occurred, there was someone in the crowd threw a bomb that then exploded, killing a few of the protesters as well as a few police officers. Albert was one of those people charged with the crime despite his not being participating in it. We're going to talk about that more in a little bit because of the legality of what that term could be for other people in the modern era. Nevertheless, Albert was among those executed for the explosion that occurred at the protest. His last words to Lucy were to be sure that she carried forward the message and continued the work, and she dang sure did. Even though she was full of grief, distraught, and a young mother, Lucy did in fact go on to continue taking the speeches of her husband, taking the works, publishing books on behalf of the labor rights movement. She continued to carry that torch forward, including being on that top tier of the labor rights workers movement alongside people like Mother Jones, who some of you may know, and if you don't, be sure to come back because I'm going to do a video on her very soon. Nevertheless, she continued to pursue and do that work and lived in the legacy of her husband. And also, in fact, so connected to the love of Albert, she continued to live in a home that was just a few blocks away from where her husband was sadly executed. They had her in a jail cell, y'all, during his execution with the 2 small children. All she could do was stay in that jail cell knowing her husband was being executed. And she lived for the next 50 years, actually more than that, 60 years, fighting for the rights of workers. So whenever we talk about things like joining into the labor rights movement, remembering that also in this era, in the Albert and Lucy era, all the labor workers were together, regardless of the language they spoke, regardless of their skin tone. It wasn't busted up until later because they recognized that they needed to separate and divide and conquer the labor rights movement. So our economy cannot be sustainable without the people who work and do business every day in this country. This country can only be sustainable because of the workers, and you have to treat the workers right. So stand tall, stand proud, continue to fight for equity and better treatment and proper pay for your labor and the time that you put in. And remember the story of Lucy and Albert and carry that torch forward.